Captain Jake Morrison pressed his face against the viewing port of his transport ship as the massive Galactic Council station came into view. The structure was enormous, larger than any human-built space station he had ever seen. It looked like a giant metal flower floating in the darkness of space, with dozens of docking arms reaching out in all directions. Ships of every shape and size were attached to these arms, each one representing a different species from across the galaxy. Jake had been traveling for 3 weeks to reach this place. He was here to replace Captain Danny Walsh, who had served as military advisor to the human delegation for the past 2 years. Jake was nervous but excited. This would be his first time seeing aliens up close, his first time representing Earth in the galactic community. The docking process took longer than expected. Jake watched through the port as his ship moved slowly toward one of the docking arms. Other ships were also arriving and leaving. He saw vessels that looked like giant insects, others that seemed to be made of pure crystal, and some that changed shape as he watched them. The diversity was incredible. When the docking clamps finally locked into place, Jake gathered his belongings and made his way to the airlock. The artificial gravity felt strange under his feet, slightly lighter than Earth normal. The air had a metallic taste to it, but it was breathable. He had been told that the station maintained an atmosphere that could support most known species. As Jake stepped off his ship, he was immediately struck by the security procedures taking place around him. At every docking bay, he could see aliens going through what appeared to be very thorough inspections. Security guards wearing full body armor were using scanning devices on every new arrival. To his left, Jake watched as a group of tall, crystalline beings were having parts of their bodies removed. The crystal creatures stood patiently as technicians used special tools to detach sharp, blade-like extensions from their arms and legs. The removed pieces were carefully placed in secure containers and labeled with identification numbers. To his right, he saw insect-like creatures submitting to a different kind of procedure. Medical technicians were injecting something into the base of their tails, which Jake realized must be neutralizing some kind of venom or poison. The insects clicked and buzzed unhappily, but did not resist. Further down the dock, reptilian beings, with scales that sparked with electricity, were standing inside special chambers. Jake could see energy being drained from their bodies through cables attached to their heads and spines. The electricity flowed into collection units that hummed with stored power. Jake stopped walking and stared. Every species he could see was being disarmed in some way. Natural weapons, biological enhancements, energy-based abilities, everything was being removed or neutralized before the aliens were allowed to proceed deeper into the station. A human voice called out to him, "Captain Morrison? Over here." Jake turned and saw a woman in a crisp military uniform walking toward him. She was tall and blonde, probably in her 40s, with the confident bearing of someone used to command. Behind her walked 2 other humans, both wearing civilian clothes. "I'm Ambassador Lisa Carter," the woman said, extending her hand. "Welcome to the Galactic Council Station." Jake shook her hand. "Thank you, Ambassador. I have to ask, why am I not going through security like everyone else?" Lisa smiled, and Jake noticed that her smile held secrets. "That's a very good question, Captain. The answer is complicated. Come on, let me show you to your quarters first. We can talk more privately there." As they walked through the station corridors, Jake continued to observe the security procedures. Every non-human he saw had been processed in some way. Some wore devices that clearly restricted their movement. Others had visible marks where weapons or dangerous body parts had been removed. A few were accompanied by floating robots that Jake guessed were monitoring devices, but the humans they passed moved freely. No guards, no monitors, no restrictions at all. Other aliens watched the humans as they passed, and Jake noticed something in their expressions that surprised him. It was not contempt or dismissal. It was respect. And something else. Something that looked almost like fear. The quarters assigned to human delegation members are in Section 7, Lisa explained as they walked. It's considered one of the safest areas of the station. Most species prefer to keep their distance from us. Why? Jake asked. You'll understand soon enough, Lisa replied. The corridors of the station were wide and tall, clearly designed to accommodate species of many different sizes. The walls were lined with what appeared to be living metal that shifted colors as they passed. The floor beneath their feet was soft and seemed to adjust to their walking patterns. Everything about the place spoke of technology far beyond anything Earth had developed. They passed through several sections, each one seeming to house different types of beings. Jake saw areas where the atmosphere was thick and green, others where the gravity was clearly much heavier than standard. In one section, he glimpsed creatures that seemed to be made of pure energy floating behind transparent barriers. How many species are represented here? Jake asked. Currently, 47 different species have permanent delegations, Lisa answered. There are dozens more that send representatives for specific issues. The Council handles disputes, trade, agreements, territorial negotiations, and emergency response coordination for most of the known galaxy. And humans have been part of this for how long? 312 years. We were one of the last species to make contact, actually. Most of the others had been dealing with each other for thousands of years before we showed up. They reached Section 7, and Jake was surprised to find that it looked almost like a small Earth city. The architecture was familiar. The lighting was warm and natural, and he could even smell something that reminded him of pine trees. It was clearly designed to make humans feel comfortable. Lisa led him to an apartment that would serve as his home for the next 2 years. It was spacious and well-furnished, with a view of the stars through a large window. Jake set down his bags and turned to face the ambassador. "All right," he said. "I've been patient, but I need to understand what's going on here. Why are humans treated differently? Why don't we have to go through security? And why do the other species look at us the way they do?" Lisa walked to the window and looked out at the stars. For a long moment, she was quiet. When she finally spoke, her voice was serious. "Captain Morrison, what I'm about to tell you will change how you see humanity's place in the galaxy. It will also help you understand why your job here is so important." She turned back to face him. "Humans are the only species allowed to enter the council chambers unarmed because we are the only species that doesn't need weapons to be dangerous." Jake frowned. "I don't understand." "Tomorrow, you'll attend your first council session. Watch. Listen. Pay attention to how the other species react when we speak. And then, if you're ready, I'll explain why every other species in the galaxy fears what we can do with nothing but our words." Jake woke early the next morning, his mind still racing with questions from his conversation with Ambassador Carter. He had spent most of the night lying awake, trying to make sense of what she had told him. How could humans be dangerous without weapons? What made them so different from the other species? After breakfast, Lisa arrived at his quarters wearing formal diplomatic robes. She carried a similar outfit for Jake, deep blue fabric with silver trim that marked him as a member of the human delegation. "Ready for your first council session?" she asked. "As ready as I can be without understanding what I'm walking into." Jake replied as he put on the robes. "Trust me, by the end of today you'll have a much better idea of what makes us special." They made their way through the station toward the council chambers. Jake noticed that the corridors were busier than they had been the day before. Aliens of all shapes and sizes were moving in the same direction, all wearing formal attire appropriate to their species. As they walked, Lisa pointed out different delegations. "Those are the Vorthak," she said, indicating a group of large, heavily armored beings. "Their natural shell plating can stop most energy weapons. The spikes along their arms and backs can extend to become deadly weapons. They're known throughout the galaxy as some of the finest warriors." Jake studied the Vorthak delegation. Even without their natural weapons extended, they looked formidable. Each one was nearly 8 feet tall and built like a living tank. Their movements were precise and controlled, like soldiers on parade. "And those," Lisa continued, "are representatives from the Zephyrian Collective." Jake looked where she was pointing and saw beings that seemed to be made of contained energy. They glowed with a soft blue light and seemed to flicker in and out of solid form. Occasionally, small sparks of electricity would jump between them. "They can manipulate electromagnetic fields," Lisa explained. "In their natural state, they can generate enough electrical energy to power a small city. They're also capable of moving at near light speed when they convert to pure energy form." As they continued walking, Jake saw more species that defied his imagination. There were insect-like beings with multiple arms and wings that buzzed as they moved. Reptilian creatures whose scales shifted color as they walked. Gaseous beings contained within specialized suits. Each delegation seemed more alien and more potentially dangerous than the last. "How do they all communicate?" Jake asked. "Universal translators," Lisa replied, pointing to a small device attached to her collar. "The technology was developed jointly by several species about 500 years ago. It reads brain patterns and converts thoughts into understandable language for any species wearing a compatible device." They reached the entrance to the council chambers, and Jake's breath caught in his throat. The room was enormous, shaped like a vast amphitheater with seating arranged in concentric circles around a central speaking area. Each section was designed for a different type of being. Some had heavy gravity fields, others were filled with different atmospheric mixes, and some were completely sealed environments. The human delegation section was located in what appeared to be a position of honor, close to the central speaking area but elevated above it. The seating was comfortable and Earth-normal with excellent views of the entire chamber. As Jake and Lisa took their seats, Jake noticed something important. Every other delegation section had visible security measures, force fields, monitoring devices, and what appeared to be automated weapon systems were all pointed at the various alien delegations. But the humans section had none of these measures. They sat completely unguarded and unmonitored. "Why don't we have security systems pointed at us?" Jake whispered to Lisa. "Because the council learned long ago that those systems wouldn't work. Against us anyway," she whispered back. Before Jake could ask what she meant, a deep tone echoed through the chamber and the session began. A being that looked like a walking tree took the central speaking platform and began the proceedings. The first item on the agenda was a territorial dispute between the Vorthak hegemony and the Kethvar swarm over mining rights in a system called Kepler 442. As the debate began, Jake got his first real look at galactic politics in action. The Vorthak representative, a massive being called War Leader Thexmar, spoke first. As he talked, Jake could see the spikes along his arms beginning to extend slightly. His voice was deep and threatening, and he spoke of ancient claims and warriors' rights. Other species in the chamber began to shift nervously as Thexmars. Natural weapons became more visible. The Kethvar response came from a being that looked like a giant praying mantis. Jake learned from his translator that her name was Hive Speaker Zakth. As she spoke, Jake noticed a sweet smell beginning to fill the air near the Kethvar delegation. Lisa leaned over and whispered that it was pheromones designed to make other species more agreeable to Kethvar demands. Both species are doing what comes naturally to them, Lisa explained quietly. The Vorthak use intimidation and the threat of physical violence. The Kethvar use chemical manipulation. Every species has their own way of trying to get what they want. The debate continued for nearly an hour, with both sides becoming more aggressive. The Vorthak delegation's spikes were now fully extended, gleaming in the chamber's lights. The sweet smell from the Kethvar section was becoming almost overwhelming. Other delegations were beginning to show signs of stress. Some were powering up energy fields, others were releasing their own pheromones or chemical markers. Jake realized that what he was watching was not really a debate at all. It was a carefully controlled battle where each species was using whatever natural advantages they possessed to try to dominate the others. The chamber was filling with tension. That felt dangerous. Then Ambassador Carter stood up. The effect was immediate and startling. Every conversation in the chamber stopped. Every head turned toward the human delegation. The Vorthak spikes began to retract. The sweet smell from the Kethvar section faded. Energy fields that had been building began to dissipate. Lisa had not said a word yet, but her mere presence had changed the entire atmosphere of the room. "Honored colleagues," she began, her voice calm and measured. "Perhaps we should examine the real issue here." She walked down to the central speaking platform, moving with confidence but no aggression. Jake noticed that every being in the chamber was watching her with complete attention. "War leader Thexmar speaks of ancient claims," Lisa continued. "But what he does not say is that the Vorthak hegemony has not used the Kepler 442 system for mining in over 300 years. The real reason for this claim is not ancient rights. It is fear." Thexmar's spikes started to extend again, but Lisa looked directly at him, and they stopped. "The Vorthak fear that other species see them as nothing more than warriors. They fear that if they do not constantly assert dominance, they will be seen as weak. This claim is not about mining rights. It is about proving that the Vorthak are still a power to be respected." Jake watched in amazement as the massive Vorthak warrior seemed to shrink under Lisa's words. She had not threatened him or used any kind of weapon, but she had clearly struck him more effectively than any physical blow could have. "And Hive Speaker Zakth," Lisa continued, turning toward the Kethvar delegation. "Your people speak of economic necessity, but the Kethvar swarm has more resources than it could use in 1,000 years. The real issue is that your species has been treated as outcasts for so long that you believe you must take what you need by force, because no one will ever give it to you freely." The insect-like being began clicking rapidly, which Jake's translator indicated was a sign of extreme agitation. "Both of your species are fighting over something that neither of you really needs, because you are both afraid of appearing weak to the rest of the galaxy." Lisa paused and looked around the chamber. Perhaps it is time to address those fears directly, rather than disguising them as territorial disputes. Jake sat in stunned silence as the most powerful warrior species and one of the most manipulative races in the galaxy both sat down without another word. The tension that had been building in the chamber for over an hour had completely disappeared. Other species began to murmur among themselves, and Jake realized that they were not just impressed by what Lisa had done. They were frightened by it. Ambassador Carter had just demonstrated why humans were the only species allowed to enter the council chambers unarmed. She had neutralized two of the galaxy's most dangerous species, not with weapons or natural abilities, but with something far more terrifying: the truth about what motivated them. After the council session ended, Jake walked back to the human quarters in stunned silence. His mind was racing with what he had witnessed. Ambassador Carter had not just ended a dispute, she had completely changed the emotional state of the entire chamber with nothing but words. "I need to understand," Jake said as soon as they were alone in Lisa's office. "What just happened in there? How did you do that?" Lisa sat down behind her desk and gestured for Jake to take a chair across from her. "What happened in there, Captain, is exactly what has been happening for over 300 years. But to understand it properly, you need to know the history." Then, "Tell me," Jake said. "There's someone better qualified to explain than I am," Lisa replied. She activated a communication device on her desk. "Archivist Morden, would you be available to meet with Captain Morrison? He needs to understand the historical context." A voice replied through the device, speaking in tones that sounded like wind chimes. Jake's translator converted it to words. "Of course, Ambassador Carter. I will meet him in Archive Chamber 7 in 1 hour." Lisa turned back to Jake. "Morden is one of the oldest beings on the station. His species, the Etherians, live for thousands of years and have perfect memory. Recall, he was here when humans first made contact with the Galactic Council." An hour later, Jake found himself in a chamber that looked more like a cathedral than an office. The walls were lined with glowing crystals that contained information in ways Jake could not begin to understand. Floating in the center of the room was a being unlike anything he had ever imagined. Morden appeared to be made of solidified light. He was roughly humanoid in shape, but seemed to shift and flow like liquid starlight. When he spoke, his voice resonated not just in Jake's ears, but somehow inside his mind. "Captain Morrison," Morden said, "Ambassador Carter tells me you wish to understand why humans hold such a unique position in our council." "Yes, sir," Jake replied. "What I saw today, I've never seen anything like it." "Nor had we when your species first arrived," Morden said. "Please, allow me to share the memory with you directly. It will be more efficient than words." Before Jake could ask what he meant, Morden extended what appeared to be a tendril of light toward Jake's forehead. The moment it made contact, Jake's vision exploded with images and sensations that were not his own. Suddenly, Jake was experiencing Morden's memories as if they were his own. He could see the Galactic Council station as it had been 3 centuries ago. The technology was less advanced, the structure smaller, but the basic layout was the same. In the memory, Jake watched as the council chambers erupted in chaos. Species that should have been allies were threatening each other with natural weapons and abilities. The Vorthak had their spikes fully extended and were advancing on the Zephyrian delegation. Energy beings were building up massive electrical charges. Insectoid species were releasing combat pheromones that made other beings aggressive and paranoid. This was what council sessions were like before humans arrived, Morden's voice explained in Jake's mind. Every meeting was a battle waiting to happen. We had created the council to prevent wars, but we had not solved the fundamental problem. In the memory, Jake watched as fights broke out regularly. Not just arguments, but actual physical violence. Council members were injured or killed during sessions. The chamber itself had been damaged multiple times by energy weapons and natural abilities. What was the fundamental problem? Jake asked. Each species brought their evolutionary advantages to the council, but those advantages were designed for survival and dominance, not cooperation, Morden explained. The Vorthak evolved on a world where only the strongest survived, so they interpreted every disagreement as a challenge to their strength. The Zephyrians developed their energy abilities to defend territory, so they saw every negotiation as a potential invasion. The Kethvar used chemical manipulation to control other species on their homeworld, so they automatically tried to do the same thing in council sessions. The memory shifted, and Jake saw a different scene. The council chamber was nearly empty, with only a few species still participating. Many delegation sections stood vacant. We were losing members, Morden continued. Species were withdrawing from the council because they felt it was too dangerous. Others were forming military alliances outside the council structure. We were heading toward the same kind of galactic war that the council had been created to prevent. What changed? Jake asked. The memory shifted again, and Jake saw something that made his heart race with excitement. A small, primitive-looking ship was docking at the station. It was clearly human-built, with technology that looked ancient compared to everything else Jake had seen. First contact, Morden said. Your species had just developed faster than light travel. You sent a small diplomatic mission to make contact with the galactic community. In the memory, Jake watched as the first human delegation disembarked from their ship. There were only 3 of them, wearing simple uniforms and carrying no visible weapons or technology. They looked tiny and fragile compared to the other species on the station. At first, we assumed you were just another minor species seeking protection from one of the major powers, Morden explained. Your technology was primitive, you had no natural weapons or special abilities, and your homeworld was in an isolated part of the galaxy. Most council members saw you as irrelevant. The memory showed the first human representative entering the council chambers. Jake could see the dismissive attitudes of the other species. Some ignored the humans entirely. Others looked at them with something approaching pity. But then Commander Pete Brooks spoke, Morden said. In the memory, Jake watched as a middle-aged human man stood up in the center of the council chamber. He was average height, with graying hair and a calm expression. Nothing about him seemed particularly impressive or threatening. Honored members of the Galactic Council, Brooks began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation. Systems. We come from a small world in what you call the local spiral. We have no great technology to offer, no powerful weapons to threaten you with, and no special abilities that might impress you. Jake could see in the memory that most of the council members were barely paying attention. Some were having side conversations, others seemed to be waiting for the human to finish so they could get back to more important business. But we do have something that might be of value, Brooks continued. We have spent our entire history learning to understand each other. Now the council members were starting to pay attention. In the memory, Jake could see delegates turning to look at the human representative with more interest. We see that you have created this council to prevent war and promote cooperation, Brooks said. But we also see that every session becomes a battle because each of you is still thinking like a separate species rather than as members of a galactic community. The chamber was completely quiet now. Jake could feel the tension building in the memory, but it was different from the aggressive tension he had witnessed in his own first council session. This was the tension of beings who were hearing something they had never heard before. War Leader Thexmar of the Vorthak Hegemony, Brooks said, looking directly at the massive armored being. You extend your spikes not because you wish to fight, but because your people have been told for generations that showing strength is the only way to earn respect. You fear that if you appear weak, Even for a moment, your enemies will see an opportunity to destroy everything your people have built. In the memory, Jake watched as the Vorthak warrior's spikes slowly retracted. The being's expression, visible even through his alien features, showed shock and something that might have been fear. Hive Speaker Zakth of the Kethvar Swarm, Brooks continued, turning to the insectoid delegate. You release pheromones not because you wish to control others, but because your species has been misunderstood and feared for so long that you believe manipulation is the only way to make others listen to your needs. The sweet smell that had been emanating from the Kethvar delegation stopped immediately. Brooks continued around the chamber, speaking to each delegation in turn. With every species, he demonstrated an understanding not just of their actions, but of the deep emotional and psychological reasons behind those actions. How did he know all of that? Jake asked Morden. That is what we all wondered, Morden replied. Commander Brooks had been on the station for less than a day. He had no access to our historical records, no briefings about the psychology of different species, and no advanced scanning technology. Yet he understood each of us better than we understood ourselves. The memory continued, showing the aftermath of Brooks's speech. For the first time in decades, a council session had ended, without a single threat, fight, or walkout. Species that had been on the verge of declaring war were instead talking quietly among themselves about the things Brooks had said. That was when we realized, Morden explained, that humans possessed something none of us had ever encountered before. Not a weapon or a defense, not a technology or a special ability, but something far more powerful, the capacity to understand the emotional and psychological motivations that drive all sentient behavior. The memory connection with Morden deepened, and Jake found himself experiencing more detailed recollections of those early days when humans first encountered the galactic community. The sensations were so vivid that Jake felt as if he were actually there, watching history unfold. He saw Commander Pete Brooks and his small team being escorted through the station corridors for the first time. The humans looked overwhelmed by the alien technology and architecture around them, but they maintained their composure. Jake could sense through Morden's memory that most station residents viewed the human delegation with a mixture of curiosity and dismissal. Your species was seen as primitives, Morden's voice explained in Jake's mind. Your ship was held together with what appeared to be metal welding. Your environmental suits looked clumsy compared to the elegant technology of other species. Many council members questioned why you had even been granted an audience. In the memory, Jake watched as the Vorthak delegation examined the humans with obvious amusement. The massive armored beings dwarfed the human representatives, and their natural weapons made the humans look defenseless by comparison. War Leader Kruxtal, Thexmar's predecessor, actually laughed when he first saw Commander Brooks, Morden remembered. He told his advisors that humans would make excellent servants once the Vorthak claimed their homeworld. The idea that these small, weak creatures could be a threat to anyone was inconceivable. The memory shifted to show Jake more details of that first crucial council session. The chamber was packed with representatives eager to see what the new species might offer, or more likely, to watch them fail spectacularly. The session that day was dealing with mining rights in the outer spiral, the same type of territorial dispute that Jake had witnessed in his own first council experience. The Zephyrian Collective was demanding exclusive access to energy-rich asteroid fields, while the Kethvar Swarm insisted they had prior claims based on ancient exploration routes. Jake watched as the debate escalated exactly as Mordoon had described. The Zephyrians began building up electromagnetic charges, their energy forms crackling with barely contained power. The Kethvar response was to release aggressive pheromones that made other species irritable and confrontational. Soon, other delegations were being drawn into the conflict. The Vorthak were extending their spikes and talking about warriors' justice. Gaseous beings in the upper atmosphere sections were changing colors in patterns that Jake's inherited knowledge told him were threat displays. Reptilian species were activating their natural electrical defenses. It was chaos, Mordoon explained. The same kind of escalation that had been destroying council sessions for decades. No one was listening to anyone else. Every species was responding with their natural defensive or aggressive behaviors. In the memory, Jake watched as the situation reached a dangerous tipping point. The Zephyrian delegate, surrounded by crackling energy, rose from his section and began moving toward the Kethvar delegation. His electromagnetic field was building to levels that could seriously injure or kill members of other species. Delegate. Zeftor was about to release an electromagnetic pulse that would have disabled half the station's systems and potentially killed several council members. Mordoon remembered. We had seen this pattern before. Once violence started, it would escalate beyond anyone's ability to control. That was when Commander Brooks stood up. Jake watched through Mordoon's memory as the human representative rose calmly from his seat. Brooks did not shout or make threatening gestures. He did not activate any weapons or defensive systems. He simply stood and began to speak in a normal, conversational tone. "Delegate Zeftor," Brooks said, his voice somehow carrying clearly through the chaos in the chamber. "You're building up an electromagnetic charge not because you want to hurt anyone, but because you're afraid." The effect was immediate and startling. The crackling energy around the Zephyrian delegate began to diminish. Other species stopped their threatening behaviors and turned to listen. "You're afraid because the Zephyrian collective has been treated as a source of free energy by other species for generations," Brooks continued. "Your people have been exploited, used as living power sources, and never given the respect you deserve as intelligent beings. This anger you feel isn't really about mining rights. It's about finally having someone take you seriously." Jake could feel through Mordoon's memory the shock that rippled through the chamber. Brooks had just described the deepest, most carefully hidden shame of the Zephyrian species. For centuries, they had been valued only for their energy generation capabilities. Other species had indeed treated them more like living batteries than equals. "And Hive Speaker Zakath," Brooks said, turning to the Kethvar delegate. "You're releasing those pheromones because you're frustrated. Your people have been exploring space for thousands of years longer than most species represented here. But you're constantly treated as newcomers and outsiders. The insectoid being stopped releasing pheromones entirely." Through Mordoon's memory, Jake could sense that Brooks had identified something the Kethvar had never even admitted to themselves. Their deep resentment at being treated as inferior despite their ancient spacefaring civilization. "But here's what I find interesting," Brooks continued, walking down to the central speaking platform. "Both of your species are fighting over resources that neither of you actually needs." He gestured toward data displays that showed the disputed asteroid fields. "The Zephyrian collective generates more energy internally in a single day than these asteroids could provide in a century. And the Kethvar swarm has mining operations in 17 different systems that are already producing more rare metals than you can process." Jake watched as representatives from both species began to shift uncomfortably. Brooks was right, and everyone in the chamber knew it. "So why are you really fighting?" Brooks asked. "It's not about resources. It's about recognition. The Zephyrians want to be seen as more than living power sources. The Kethvar want acknowledgement of their rightful place as one of the galaxy's oldest civilizations. The chamber fell completely silent. Through Morden's memory, Jake could sense that something unprecedented was happening. A representative from a species that had barely achieved interstellar travel was systematically dismantling a conflict that had been building for months. What if, Brooks suggested, instead of fighting over mining rights that neither of you needs, you worked together to establish the first joint research station in that sector? The Zephyrians could provide power systems unlike anything the galaxy has ever seen, and the Kethvar could contribute their ancient knowledge of stellar phenomena. In the memory, Jake watched as both delegations considered this proposal. The Zephyrian delegate's energy field had completely calmed. The Kethvar representative had stopped all pheromone release. Such a partnership would demonstrate to the entire galaxy that the Zephyrians are capable of far more than simple energy generation, Brooks continued, and it would acknowledge the Kethvar as the experienced space explorers they have always been. This was the moment, Mordoon explained to Jake, when we realized that humans possessed something none of us had encountered before. Commander, Brooks had not threatened anyone or offered bribes or made promises of military support. He had simply looked at the situation and understood what each species really wanted. In the memory, Jake watched as both the Zephyrian and Kethvar delegates agreed to consider the joint research station proposal. The session ended without violence, without threats, and without anyone leaving in anger. How did he do it? Jake asked Mordoon. How could he understand alien psychology so quickly? That is the question we all asked, Mordoon replied. After the session, every species sent investigators to study human behavior and psychology. What they discovered was unprecedented. The memory shifted to show Jake various alien scientists studying human behavior. He watched as they observed humans, interacting with each other, analyzing their social structures, and testing their responses to different situations. Humans, we learned, had evolved something unique, Morden explained. Your species developed on a world where survival depended not on individual strength or special abilities, but on cooperation between groups. You had to learn to understand the motivations and emotions of others in order to work together effectively. Jake saw through the memory how human evolution had been different from that of other species. While most aliens had developed powerful physical abilities or energy manipulation or chemical defenses, humans had developed emotional intelligence and social cooperation. But more than that, Mordun continued, humans had developed the ability to apply that emotional understanding across species barriers. You could look at a being completely unlike yourself and still recognize the basic drives and fears that motivated them. In the memory, Jake watched as the alien researchers became increasingly disturbed by their findings. They realized that humans could predict behavior, identify hidden motivations, and manipulate emotional responses in ways that transcended biological differences. That was when the galaxy understood, Morden said, that humans were not a weak species seeking protection. You were the most psychologically dangerous beings any of us had ever encountered. As the memory connection with Morden faded, Jake found himself back in the archive chamber, his mind reeling from what he had experienced. The glowing being before him pulsed gently, waiting for Jake to process the information he had received. I need to understand something, Jake said slowly. You're telling me that humans are feared throughout the galaxy because we can understand other species' emotions. It is far more complex than that. Mordun replied, his voice resonating with harmonics that spoke of ancient wisdom. Allow me to show you what we discovered about human capabilities after Commander Brooks's first intervention. Another tendril of light reached toward Jake, and once again he was experiencing Mordun's memories as his own. This time he saw the intensive research that had been conducted on human psychology and behavior in the months following first contact. In the memory, Jake watched as alien scientists from dozens of species worked together to understand what made humans unique. They had built special observation facilities where they could study human behavior without being detected. They analyzed thousands of hours of recorded human interactions. They tested human responses to various psychological stimuli. What we found, Mordun explained, was that human evolution had created something unprecedented in the galaxy. Your species had developed what we came to call cross-species emotional intelligence. Jake saw through the memory how the research teams had made their discoveries. They observed humans interacting with different alien species for the first time, and were amazed to see that humans could quickly identify emotional states and motivations even in beings they had never encountered before. Most species can understand the psychology of their own kind, Mordun continued. Some can extend that understanding to closely related species, but humans demonstrated the ability to read emotional patterns across completely different biological and psychological frameworks. In the memory, Jake watched test scenarios where humans were placed in rooms with alien beings experiencing various emotional states. The humans could consistently identify whether the aliens were angry, afraid, sad, or excited, even when those emotions were expressed through completely unfamiliar biological markers. A human could look at a crystalline collective member and recognize stress patterns in the way their mineral structure vibrated, Mordun explained. They could identify deception in a gaseous being by observing subtle changes in their atmospheric density. They could detect fear in a machine intelligence by noticing variations in their processing rhythms. Jake felt a chill run through him as he began to understand the implications. Humans weren't just good at reading emotions. They were apparently capable of understanding the deepest psychological motivations of any sentient being, regardless of how alien that being might be. But that's not the most frightening part, Mordun continued. What truly terrified the galaxy was what humans could do with that understanding. The memory shifted to show Jake recorded sessions of humans interacting with various alien species. In each case, the humans demonstrated an ability not just to understand alien psychology, but to influence it with surgical precision. Jake watched as a human researcher spoke with a representative from the aggressive Xerion Empire, the Xerion. Being started the conversation in a highly agitated state, its crystalline body resonating with aggressive harmonics. But within minutes of talking with the human, the Xerion became calm and cooperative. The human had identified that the Xerion's aggression was masking deep anxiety about their species' declining birth rates, Mordun explained. By addressing those underlying fears, rather than responding to the surface aggression, the human was able to completely change the Xerion's emotional state. In another scene, Jake saw a human diplomat meeting with representatives from the paranoid Umbral Collective, beings who lived in the spaces between dimensions and trusted no one. These entities normally refused all contact with other species, but the human managed to establish a meaningful dialogue within hours. The human recognized that the Umbral Collective's paranoia was actually a defensive response to their species' unique vulnerability to dimensional parasites, Mordun said. By demonstrating understanding of their genuine security concerns, The human earned their trust in a way no other species had ever managed. Jake began to feel overwhelmed by what he was seeing. These weren't just examples of good diplomacy. They were demonstrations of an almost supernatural ability to understand and influence the behavior of completely alien minds. "How is this possible?" Jake asked. "How can humans understand alien psychology better than the aliens understand themselves?" That question occupied our greatest scientists for years, Mordun replied. "The answer lies in how your species evolved on Earth." The memory shifted to show Jake images of human evolutionary history, as understood by galactic scientists. He saw early humans surviving in hostile environments, not through individual strength, but through complex social cooperation. Humans evolved in small groups where survival depended on understanding and predicting the behavior of others, Mordun explained. But unlike most species, humans had to cooperate with groups that were not genetically related to them. This required developing the ability to understand motivations and emotions across different cultural and even genetic backgrounds. Jake saw how this had led to humans developing what the alien researchers called universal emotional pattern recognition. Humans had learned to identify the basic emotional and psychological drives that existed in all intelligent beings, regardless of their specific biology or culture. But more than that, Mordun continued, humans developed the ability to use that understanding to influence behavior in positive ways. Your species learned that the most effective way to get what you need from others is to help them get what they need as well. In the memory, Jake watched as alien researchers tested this theory by observing human negotiation tactics. They found that humans consistently approached conflicts by trying to understand the underlying needs and fears of all parties involved, then finding solutions that addressed those deeper issues. This is what made Commander Brooks so effective. In that first council session, Mordun explained, he did not try to impose human will on the other species. Instead, he identified what each species really needed and found a way to give it to them. The implications of this revelation began to sink in for Jake. Humans weren't just good diplomats. They were essentially a species of natural psychologists who could understand and influence the behavior of any intelligent being they encountered. "And this is why other species fear us?" Jake asked. "Fear and respect," Mordun corrected. "Consider what it means to be in a room with beings who can see through any deception, understand your deepest motivations, and predict your behavior with uncanny accuracy. From the perspective of other species, humans possess a form of mind reading that is more invasive than any technological scanning device." Jake watched through the memory as various alien species conducted security assessments of human capabilities. The reports were consistently disturbing. Humans could identify lies, hidden agendas, psychological weaknesses, and secret fears with an accuracy that seemed almost magical to other species. But unlike most forms of mental intrusion, Mordun continued, human psychological insight cannot be blocked by technology or natural defenses. A Vorthak can retract their spikes, a Zephyrian can contain their energy, but no species has found a way to hide their emotional patterns from human observation. In the memory, Jake saw experiments where various species tried to deceive human observers using advanced technology, psychic abilities, and biological camouflage. In every case, the humans were able to detect the deception by reading subtle behavioral cues that the aliens weren't even aware they were displaying. This is why no human has ever been searched or disarmed when entering the council chambers, Mordun explained. Because we realized that trying to neutralize human psychological capabilities would be like trying to remove their ability to think. It is not a weapon they carry. It is what they are. The memory began to fade, and Jake found himself back in the archive chamber, staring at Morden's glowing form. "Now you understand," Mordoon said, "why humans hold such a unique position in galactic society. You are the only species that other beings both trust and fear. Trust because your psychological insight makes you incredibly effective at finding solutions that work for everyone. Fear because that same insight makes it impossible to hide anything from you." Jake sat in silence for several minutes, absorbing the magnitude of what he had learned. Humans weren't just another species in the galactic community. They were psychological predators whose mere presence could influence the behavior of any other intelligent being. "And every human can do this?" Jake asked finally. "To varying degrees," Morden replied. "Some humans are more naturally gifted than others, but all humans possess this capability to some extent. It is as natural to your species as echolocation is to certain Earth animals." Jake thought about Ambassador Carter's performance in the council session, and suddenly it made perfect sense. She hadn't been using some special training or advanced technology. She had simply been doing what came naturally to humans. Understanding the psychological motivations, Jake returned to his quarters that evening with his mind spinning from everything he had learned. The revelation that humans were essentially psychological weapons disguised as diplomats was almost too much to process. He tried to sleep, but his thoughts kept returning to the implications of what Morden had shown him. He was awakened the next morning by urgent alarms echoing through the station. Emergency lights flashed in his quarters, and the station's communication system crackled to life with urgent announcements in dozens of alien languages. Jake's translator picked up fragments. "Emergency session, immediate assembly, unprecedented breach of protocol." Jake dressed quickly and rushed to find Ambassador Carter, but when he reached her quarters, he found them empty. A maintenance worker, one of the few non-council species allowed on the station, told him that Carter had left on an emergency diplomatic mission to the Outer Rim 3 hours earlier. More alarms sounded, and Jake felt the station shudder around him. That was impossible. The council station was protected by energy shields that could withstand attacks from entire fleets. What could possibly be powerful enough to shake the entire structure? Jake made his way toward the council chambers, following streams of agitated alien beings who were all moving in the same direction. The corridors buzzed with nervous energy and the sound of alien languages being spoken at rapid, worried speeds. When Jake reached the council chambers, he found chaos. The chamber was packed with delegates, but instead of the orderly seating arrangements he had seen before, beings were clustered in species-specific groups, all talking at once. Security forces were everywhere, their weapons visible and ready. In the center of the chamber, where the speaking platform should have been, stood beings Jake had never seen before. They were tall and crystalline, but unlike the peaceful crystalline collective members Jake had observed earlier, these beings seemed to be made of a different kind of mineral altogether, darker, more angular, and crackling with energy that made the air around them shimmer. "The Xerion Empire," Jake heard someone say behind him. He turned to see Mordoon floating nearby, his light form pulsing with agitation. "I thought they were just a distant threat," Jake said. "What are they doing?" "Here." "They have bypassed all diplomatic protocols," Mordun replied. "Xerion beings can manipulate quantum fields to tunnel through space itself. They appeared directly in the council chambers 15 minutes ago and are demanding immediate surrender of 3 star systems in the contested zone." Jake looked more closely at the Xerion delegation. There were 7 of them, each one nearly 10 feet tall and glowing with an inner light that hurt to look at directly. Their crystalline bodies were constantly shifting and reconfiguring, and the air around them crackled with quantum energy discharges. "Where is their leader?" Jake asked. "The largest one," Mordun indicated. "Emperor Toxaran. He has declared that they will take the star systems by force if the Council does not agree to their demands within 1 standard hour." Jake studied the Zarian Emperor. Toxaran was massive even by Zarian standards, his crystalline body nearly 12 feet tall and glowing with an intensity that forced other beings to shield their eyes. But as Jake watched, he noticed something that the other council members seemed to have missed. The Emperor's quantum tunneling field was fluctuating irregularly. Jake had never seen a Zarian before, but something about the energy pattern seemed wrong. It was unstable, almost erratic. "Archivist Mordun," Jake said quietly. "I need to know everything about Zarian physiology. Quickly." Mordun's form pulsed, and suddenly Jake's mind was flooded with information about the Zarian Empire. They were silicon-based beings who drew energy directly from stellar radiation. Their crystalline bodies could store and manipulate vast amounts of quantum energy. They were incredibly long-lived, with some individuals surviving for thousands of years. But there was something else in the information Mordun provided. The Zarian home system's star was in the late stages of its life cycle. It was producing increasing amounts of harmful radiation that was slowly poisoning the Zarian population. The species was facing extinction within a few centuries unless they could find new sources of clean stellar energy. Jake looked at Emperor Toxaran again, and now he understood what he was seeing. The irregular quantum fluctuations weren't a sign of power. They were a sign of illness. The Emperor was suffering from radiation poisoning, and he was trying to hide it from the Council. "Has anyone tried to negotiate with them?" Jake asked. "Several species have attempted to reason with them," Mordun replied. "The Vorthak offered to fight them for the disputed systems. The Zephyrians tried to demonstrate superior energy projection capabilities. The Kethvar released diplomatic pheromones. Nothing has worked." Jake could see why. Every species was responding to the Zarian's demands with their own natural advantages: physical threats, energy displays, chemical manipulation. But none of them were addressing the real issue. "Where is the senior human representative?" Jake asked. "Ambassador Carter is 3 days away at minimum," Mordun replied. "You are the ranking human delegate on the station." Jake felt his stomach drop. 300 years of galactic peace suddenly depended on his ability to do something he had only learned was possible yesterday. "Archivist, I need you to announce me to the Council," Jake said. "Captain Morrison, perhaps you should wait for Ambassador Carter's return," Mordun suggested. "The Zarians are extremely dangerous when threatened." "If I wait, they'll start a war," Jake replied. "Look at the chamber. Every species is preparing for conflict. The Vorthak have their weapons extended. The Zephyrians are building up energy charges. If this continues for another hour, someone is going to do something stupid, and people are going to die." Jake looked around the chamber and saw that Mordun was right. The tension was building toward a breaking point. Species that had been peaceful, neighbors for centuries, were eyeing each other suspiciously, wondering who would be the first to support or oppose the Zarian demands. "Besides," Jake added, "I think I know what the Zarians really want." Mordun pulsed uncertainly, but activated his communications array. His voice echoed through the chamber in every language simultaneously. "The Council recognizes Captain Jake Morrison, representing the human delegation." The effect was immediate. Every conversation in the chamber stopped. Every head turned toward, oh, Jake. The Zarian Emperor's glowing form shifted to focus on him. Jake walked down to the central speaking area, aware that hundreds of alien beings were watching his every move. The quantum energy radiating from the Zarian delegation made his skin tingle, and he could smell ozone in the air around them. "Emperor Toxran," Jake said, looking directly at the massive crystalline being. "I see you." The Emperor's form flickered, with surprise. Other species would have addressed his demands or his threats. Jake was addressing him personally. "You have traveled here not to take star systems from us," Jake continued, "but to save your people from something we cannot see." Toxran's quantum field fluctuated more dramatically. "Human, you speak of things you do not understand." "I understand more than you think," Jake replied. "I can see that your quantum tunneling field is destabilizing. That's not a sign of power. It's a sign that your crystalline matrix is being damaged by radiation poisoning." A shocked silence fell over the chamber. No other species had noticed the Emperor's condition, but Jake's human perception had picked up on the subtle signs that Toxran was trying to hide. "Your star is dying," Jake said gently. "It's producing radiation that is slowly killing your entire species. You need those star systems not for conquest, but for survival. You need clean stellar energy to heal your people." Emperor Toxran's massive form began to tremble. "The Zarian Empire does not beg for assistance," he said, but his voice carried a note of desperation that everyone in the chamber could hear. "You're not begging," Jake replied. "You're trying to save your species the only way you know how. But what if I told you there was a better way?" For the first time since the Zarians had arrived, the Emperor's aggressive posture began to soften. "What do you mean, human?" Jake looked around the chamber at the assembled delegations. "What if, instead of taking those star systems by force and starting a war that will cost thousands of lives, we work together to find a solution that could save your people and preserve the peace?" "The Zarian Empire does not show weakness," Toxran said, but his voice was less certain now. "Asking for help to save your species isn't weakness," Jake replied. "It's the most courageous thing a leader can do." Jake could see that his words were having an effect not just on the Emperor, but on the entire chamber. Other species were beginning to understand that the Zarians weren't aggressive conquerors. They were a dying people desperate for survival. "What solution do you propose?" Toxran asked. Jake took a deep breath. This was the moment when he would either prove himself worthy of humanity's reputation or start the first galactic war in 3 centuries. Jake stood in the center of the council chamber, feeling the weight of hundreds of alien gazes upon him. Emperor Toxran's massive crystalline form towered above him, quantum energy crackling in the air between them. The entire galaxy seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see if a human could prevent the first major war in 3 centuries. "Emperor Toxran," Jake began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "You're asking for 3 star systems that contain young, stable stars. Stars that could provide clean energy to heal your people's radiation poisoning." The Emperor's form flickered with acknowledgement, but also with defensive anger. "The Zarian Empire takes what it needs to survive, but taking those systems by force would require you to fight 3 different species who have legitimate claims. To them," Jake continued, "the Vorthak consider them sacred burial grounds. The Kethavar have mining operations there that support millions of their workers. The gaseous beings use them as nursery systems for their young." Jake could see around the chamber that representatives from these species were tensing. preparing for battle if the Xerians pressed their demands. A war over those systems would cost more lives than your radiation poisoning ever could, Jake said. And even if you won, the other species would never stop fighting to reclaim what they lost. Your people would spend the next 1,000 years defending territory instead of healing. Emperor Toxran's quantum field pulsed with frustration. Then what would you have us do, human? Watch our species die slowly while others prosper? I would. Have you accept help? Jake replied simply. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Around the chamber, alien beings began to murmur among themselves. The concept of one species offering aid to another without expecting conquest in return was still relatively new in galactic politics. The Xerian Empire has never... Toxran began. The Xerian Empire has never been offered real help before, Jake interrupted gently. You've been surrounded by species who saw your quantum tunneling abilities as a threat, your territorial demands as aggression, and your desperation as weakness. No one bothered to understand what you actually needed. Jake turned to address the entire chamber. But here's what I see when I look at this situation. The Xerians need clean stellar energy. The Zephyrian collective generates more energy than they can possibly use. The crystalline beings are experts at storing and focusing stellar radiation. The Etherians, like Archivist Mordan, have technology that can purify contaminated energy fields. He could see that his words were having an effect. Representatives from the species he had mentioned were looking at each other with new interest. And the Xerians themselves have quantum tunneling technology that could revolutionize energy transport across the galaxy. Jake continued. Instead of fighting over existing star systems, why not work together to make better use of the ones we already have? Emperor Toxran's form was trembling now, but Jake could see that it wasn't from anger anymore. It was from hope, and the fear that hope might be misplaced. You speak of cooperation, Toxran said slowly, but why would these species help us? We have threatened them. We have demanded their territory. Because, Jake said, you did those things out of desperation, not malice. And because every species in this chamber has faced extinction at some point in their history. They understand what it means to fight for survival. Jake looked directly at the Vorthak delegation. War leader Thexmar, your people survived the Great Plague 2,000 years ago only because the Etherians shared their medical technology with you. The massive armored being nodded slowly, his spikes retracting slightly. Jake turned to the Zephyrian representative. Delegate Zyftor, your collective was nearly destroyed by energy parasites until the Kethvar taught you how to create protective electromagnetic fields. The energy being's crackling form pulsed with acknowledgement. Hive speaker Zakth, Jake, addressed the insectoid delegate. Your swarm survived the asteroid impacts on your homeworld because the gaseous beings provided you with atmospheric processors. The insect-like being clicked rapidly in what Jake's translator identified as agreement. Every species here has survived because others helped them in their darkest hour, Jake said. The Xerians are facing their darkest hour now. Jake turned, back to Emperor Toxran. But here's the thing, Your Majesty. You can't just take help. You have to accept it. And that means admitting that the mighty Xerion Empire needs assistance. This was the crucial moment. Jake could see that Toxran was struggling with concepts that went against everything his warrior culture had taught him. In Xerion society, showing weakness was the ultimate shame. But Jake had to make him understand that asking for help was actually the strongest thing he could do. Your Majesty, Jake said quietly, what does it mean to be a true emperor? Toxran's quantum field fluctuated with confusion. To be strong, To protect one's people, to show no weakness. Is protecting your people more important than protecting your pride? Jake asked. The question hit the Emperor like a physical blow. His massive form wavered, and for a moment, the quantum energy around him completely stabilized. In that moment of clarity, Jake could see the being's true nature, not a conqueror, but a leader who was terrified of failing his people. If accepting help means saving your species, Jake continued, then refusing help because of pride means choosing to let them die. Which choice makes you stronger? Emperor Toxaran stood silent for nearly a full minute. The entire chamber waited, understanding that the fate of galactic peace hung on his next words. Human, Toxaran said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. If the Xerian Empire were to request assistance from the Galactic Council, what would be required of us? The change in his language was subtle but significant. He had shifted from demanding tribute to requesting aid. Jake felt a wave of relief, but he knew the hardest part was still ahead. You would need to formally withdraw your territorial demands, Jake said. You would need to apologize to the species you threatened. And you would need to accept that accepting help means becoming part of the galactic community, not standing apart from it. And in return, Jake looked around the chamber at the various delegations. In return, the combined resources and knowledge of 47 different species would be focused on solving your people's crisis. The Zephyrians could provide clean energy. The crystalline beings could design purification systems, the Etherians could develop radiation treatments, and your quantum tunneling technology could make all of this happen faster than anyone thought possible. Toxran's form began to glow brighter, but it was a different kind of light now. Instead of the harsh glare of aggressive energy, it was the warm radiance of hope. Human, the Emperor said. I do not understand how you can see solutions where others see only conflict. Because, Jake replied, humans learned long ago that the strongest societies are built not on the power of individuals, but on the cooperation of communities. We survived on our world not because we were the strongest or the fastest or the most dangerous. We survived because we learned to work together. Jake gestured to the assembled council. This chamber represents the same principle on a galactic scale. 47 species, each with their own strengths and weaknesses, working together to create something greater than any of them could achieve alone. Emperor Toxaran looked around the chamber, seeing it with new eyes. And you believe the Xerion Empire could be part of this community? I believe, Jake said, that the galaxy needs what the Xerians have to offer. But more than that, I believe the Xerians need what the galaxy has to offer, not as conquerors taking from the weak, but as equals contributing to something magnificent. The Emperor's massive form began to change. The aggressive angles of his crystalline structure softened. The harsh quantum energy that had been crackling around him settled into a steady, peaceful glow. Then, Toxaran said, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber, the Xerian Empire formally requests assistance from the Galactic Council in addressing the crisis facing our people. The chamber erupted in surprised murmurs from dozens of species. No one had expected the proud Xerian Empire to actually ask for help. But Jake wasn't finished yet. He could see that while Toxaran had accepted the need for assistance, the other council members were still uncertain about trusting a species that had just threatened them with war. Delegate Zyphtor, Jake called out to the Zephyrian representative. Your people generate vast amounts of excess energy every day. Could some of that energy be adapted to Xerion physiology? The energy being pulsed thoughtfully. It would be possible. We have wondered for generations if our excess energy could be useful to other species. Hive speaker Zaxth, Jake continued, your people have the most extensive deep space mining operations in the galaxy. You could probably identify systems with the exact type of clean stellar radiation the Xerians need, the insectoid being clicked rapidly. Our exploration data could indeed be useful for such a purpose. Jake was systematically involving every major species in the solution, making them all stakeholders in the Xerian survival rather than opponents to their expansion. And Emperor Toxran, Jake said, your quantum tunneling technology could allow instantaneous transport of energy and materials across vast. The council chamber remained silent for several heartbeats after Emperor Toxran's declaration. Jake could feel the weight of the moment. 47 different species processing the fact that a crisis that should have led to war had instead resulted in a request for cooperation. Then, slowly, representatives began to stand. First, the Etherians, their light forms pulsing with approval. Then the Zephyrians, their energy bodies crackling with what Jake's enhanced understanding told him was excitement rather than aggression. The Kethavar delegation buzzed with harmonious clicks. Even the normally stoic Vorthak were extending their arms in what Jake recognized as a gesture of acceptance. War leader Thexmar stood and addressed Emperor Toxran directly. The Vorthak hegemony has faced extinction before. We understand the courage it takes to ask for help. We pledge our support to the Xerion integration proposal. One by one, other species began to offer their assistance. The gaseous beings promised atmospheric processing technology. The crystalline collective offered their expertise in energy storage and focusing. Even smaller species that Jake had barely noticed before were volunteering resources and knowledge. But as Jake watched this unprecedented display of galactic cooperation unfold, he noticed something that chilled him to the bone. Emperor Toxran was watching him with an expression that transcended species barriers. It was recognition, and it was deeply unsettling. Captain Morrison, Toxran said, his massive crystalline form approaching Jake in the center of the chamber. I must speak with you privately. The request was highly unusual. Council proceedings were always public, but given the circumstances, no one objected. Toxran activated a quantum field that created a sphere of privacy around himself and Jake, blocking sound and other forms of observation. Human, Toxran said, his voice low and intense. I need you to understand something. What you did here today was not diplomacy. It was something far more dangerous. Jake felt his heart rate increase. What do you mean? You saw. Through every defense I had, Toxran replied. My threats, my demands, my displays of power, none of it fooled you for even a moment. You looked at me and saw not what I was pretending to be, but what I was desperately trying to hide. The Emperor's quantum field fluctuated with what Jake realized was a mixture of gratitude and fear. In my entire life, spanning over 2,000 years, no being has ever understood me so completely. You saw my people suffering, my own illness, my terror at the thought of failing as their leader. You saw everything. Jake tried to speak, but Toxran continued. But more than that, you took that understanding and used it to manipulate not just me, but this entire chamber. You made me want to ask for help. You made the other species want to provide it. You orchestrated the emotions and motivations of dozens of different beings, as if you were conducting a symphony. Toxran's form leaned closer to Jake. Now I understand why the galaxy fears your species. You do not need weapons or technology or natural abilities to control others. You simply understand them better than they understand themselves, and that understanding is the most terrifying weapon in the universe. Jake felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the full implications of what Toxran was saying. He had not just prevented a war, he had demonstrated the exact psychological manipulation capabilities that made humans so feared throughout the galaxy. "Your Majesty," Jake said carefully, "I wasn't trying to manipulate anyone. I was trying to find a solution that would work for everyone. And that," Toxran replied, "is what makes you so dangerous. You believe you are helping, but you are reshaping the thoughts and desires of entire civilizations. Do you understand the power you wield?" Before Jake could respond, Toxran deactivated the privacy field and addressed the entire chamber.